Hello everyone, welcome back to our monthly episode of Land, Oceans and Business. Today we're joined by Scott Black, Executive Director at Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. For over 3 decades, Scott has led efforts to protect and restore millions of acres of habitat for pollinators and other invertebrates, helping safeguard species critical to our planet's health. It's actually the first episode where we're talking about land, but we're really focusing on pollinators. So to be honest, more than a host today, I feel like it's a huge learning episode for me, which is going to be super interesting. Scott will be bringing in deep insights into why protecting these tiny creatures has such a big impact, and of course, the role that we can all play to take action. So without further ado, welcome, Scott. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So just to start the conversation, Scott, I thought that we could take a bit of a broader overview of what Xerces Society is doing and how you're working, of course, with invertebrate conservation, especially pollinators like bees, and how that connects to broader environmental goals.
Yeah, so the Xerces Society works to protect the life that sustains us. And that means all invertebrates, including insects, crustaceans, mollusks, the whole gamut. And when we think of invertebrates, it's a big group of animals, but there's a couple things to remember. There are more invertebrates on the planet than any other animals. There are more species, there are more individuals. And invertebrates are found in every environment. And because of that, because there's so many of them and they're found everywhere, they really are the underpinning of all life on the planet. If you like birds in your trees, you should thank an insect. About 94% of songbirds have to feed their young insects. If you like fish in your streams, you can thank caddisflies and mayflies and actually worms and a lot of things that live in those streams that feed those fish. If you like healthy soils, it's the insects that are making our soils healthy to help grow the plants that we grow. And if you like pollination, you certainly should like insects because the vast majority of food we eat and the healthiest food that we get comes from insect pollination. So our goal at Xerces is to do the entire pipeline of conservation. So we do applied research, we do community science, we do outreach and education, and we do policy, all leading to on the ground change for these animals. And that's basically what we do. And again, to reiterate, without these animals. I'll take a step back and say, I appreciate conservation of any animal. We should be working
Yeah.
on Bengal tigers and polar bears and whales and everything else. But we shouldn't discount the little things that are poorly known and poorly understood and sometimes misunderstood, right? So that's where Xerces comes in to tie it all together because we won't have the whales, we won't have the grizzly bears, we won't have the Bengal tigers without all of these animals helping to kind of run the planet at the base.
Thank you, Scott. That's so interesting. Like even for me, whenever I think, and I feel like this is a discourse that you'll be very familiar with when we're talking about animals that are crucial, insects that are crucial for the planet. The first one that always comes to mind are bees. This is
Yeah.
what we're always talking about. This is a huge hype as well that is going on, where I see so many companies, NGOs, impact organizations talking about the importance of bees. But here, what you're saying is extremely interesting, which I also didn't know, which is also the importance of all the invertebrates in the whole ecosystem. Also for me, actually, at the beginning of the podcast, I said this is the first land episode. But now that you say this, it's actually not just a land episode. This is a global
That's
episode
right.
that covers every single aspect of the planet. So that's super interesting. And actually, it makes a perfect bridge to the next question, because it's what I was just saying, that bees are often seen as the face of pollinator conservation. And the question here is, what are some common misconceptions about bee conservation, and why is it, yeah, like why is this issue so urgent today? Why is there a need to take action?
Yeah, so there are a lot of misconceptions. And to take a step back, when we think about pollination, we need to remember that there are really several types of pollination. There's wind pollination of a lot of trees and things like that. But the vast majority of flowering plants, about 85%, are pollinated by animals. And for the most part, they're pollinated by insects. And I'll talk about the very, very importance of bees in just a second. But what's cool about pollination is there are a lot of animals that pollinate at least a little bit. Lemurs in Madagascar are probably the largest pollinator we have.
Oh,
There's
wow.
a slug pollinator. Of course, hummingbirds pollinate, and some other birds, especially in equatorial areas of rainforest, are important pollinators. But the main pollinators, because there's again so many and so many different groups of them, are the insects. And there are a variety of insect pollinators. Beetles pollinate, flies pollinate, butterflies and moths pollinate. But the most efficient and effective pollinators, especially in temperate areas like Europe, northern parts of Asia, the United States, and a lot of South America, are bees. And bees are the most important, probably, pollinators on the planet. And that's for one reason. Most animals actually just go to a flower to get nectar or eat pollen. Bees actually go to a flower to collect pollen and nectar to provision a nest for their young. So they collect so much more pollen and nectar than other animals. And if you remember your biology, pollination only happens if you can transfer pollen from one flower to another flower. So, on an
Indeed.
individual basis, bees are just collecting the most pollen, and so they're doing the most pollination. They're just so efficient at it because they're providing for their young. So, a couple misconceptions that people have are that honeybees do most of the pollination. Many people, when they think of bees, they think of honeybees. Honeybees are very, very important for agriculture. Um, they are one of the predominant, but not the only, pollinator of agriculture. A lot of native bees do pollinate. And in the New World, what we call the New World, North America and South America, honeybees are not even native. So we brought honeybees with us as Europeans to North America. And if you're thinking of so crops, they're important for. But if you're thinking ecosystems, it's the native bees that evolved with these ecosystems. And there are around 60,000 native bees across the
Wow.
world. So there are many, many, many native bees. And these are the animals, if you like, flowering meadows and forests with good pollination and just any landscape that you're hoping to have pollination to keep these ecosystems healthy. That's the native bees. That's not, for the most part, the honeybees. Um, so that's one thing we really talk a lot about is again, honeybees are important for agriculture. Some of the same issues affect honeybees that affect native bees, but we need to go beyond honeybees to if we want really to protect bees. And when people started thinking about pollination, one of the things they thought is, I should get a hive. I should help bees. I should get a hive.
Indeed.
That'll be a way to
Yeah.
help bees. And that's another misconception because having a hive does not help bees. Actually, it can actually harm bees because if you don't take care of your hive, there can be diseases that harm other honeybees and harm other bees. So, what we like to say is if you really care about pollinators, whether it's honeybees or native bees, they all need the same thing. They need flowering landscapes where they can get pollen and nectar. They need areas that they can nest, and they need a refuge from pesticides because pesticides, especially insecticides, kill them. So um, that's the key. The key misconception is that honeybees are the most important bee, and some people think of them as the only bee. But there are so many different bees. They're in every different ecosystem and have filled many, many different niches. And if we want to sustain life on the planet, we have to focus broadly on all the bees.
That's so interesting, Scott, especially because when we think about the bees, we're just putting bees under one whole name, right? It's just
Yeah.
bees. But we forget that there are so many different species, right? The ones that are very good for agriculture, the honeybees. I mean, I'm a very, very beginner in the bee world, but I'm sure that there are so many different species of bees that
Yeah.
there are. And actually, based on, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, and when you say that, that's really kind of important to think about. So you've got honeybees.
Yeah,
I think many people might know bumblebees.
yeah,
Winnie the
yeah,
Pooh, that's bumblebees and Winnie the Pooh. Although they're eating honey, it's kind of interesting. They're kind of using both. But bees come
yeah.
in every shape and size. The tiniest bee is as big as a pinhead. The largest bee is over an inch long. They come in a rainbow of colors from metallic green and bottle blue to striped and yellow. They're an amazing group of animals, and a lot of them people wouldn't even think of as bees. They probably look at them and think, "Oh, that's a fly," or "That's something
Yeah, yeah,
else."
yeah. Another
But
insect. Oh,
so we
that's
have so many, and but the cool thing is that the neat thing about pollinators, the neat thing about bees, is that we know what to do to conserve them, and anybody can do it. So, it's hard to go out and actively work on the conservation of wolves or whales or something like that. But anybody with just a balcony with some flowers or a yard or a farm or managing a park can help pollinators, and that's the neat thing is because we're seeing so many people step up to help. And it's not just about giving money to nonprofits. Please do. They all need it. Everybody needs it. That's how we drive. But having people actually take action at the end of the day is what is going to drive the real change.
indeed. Scott, are there parts of the world that are more concentrated with these essential pollinators? Like, okay, for the sake of the conversation, let's stick to bees in this case, like at their like critical ecosystems or like critical biodiversity hotspots. I think that it's how it's called, where really bees are concentrated and where people can really do something about it, or they just spread
Yeah,
all
there
around.
there there definitely are biodiversity hotspots for bees. The Pacific, or
Yeah.
sorry, in the United States, for instance, the Southwest. That's got so much diversity. And there are certainly areas, but it's across the world. I mean, this is an issue that is global, and
Yeah,
any
indeed.
terrestrial landscape is
Yeah.
going to be driven by pollinators, and in many cases, that's bees. Not in every case, flies, beetles, as I said, hummingbirds, and other birds can be important. Bats, for certain things, can be important pollinators. Um, but it's everywhere. And yes, although we have biodiversity hotspots, I think the neat thing about pollinator conservation is you don't even need to live near a biodiversity hotspot. We need bees,
Correct.
whether
Yeah.
you're in Rome, whether you're in
Yeah.
London, whether you're in the
Everywhere.
forest in Germany or a rainforest in Brazil. These animals are vital, and we can focus on their conservation wherever we live. And that's the neat thing that I find about my job is, again, it's not something far away. It's something right here. I can look in my yard. You can go out right after this
Yeah.
podcast and see if you start looking bees wherever you are. No matter how urban an area you're in, you're going to find bees.
Yeah, yeah, true. Scott, I'm really curious about the actions that individuals like you and I can make. And I really want to leave that for the last part of the
Great.
podcast because I feel like that's going to be amazing for to wrap up. But before we do that, first I want to dive in a bit more because this is such a rich conversation that we're having. And it's more about, the curiosity that I have of what happens when invertebrates are protected, what will happen in the ecosystems, and the other way around, what happens when they are neglected.
Yeah, so what happens specifically if you're thinking pollinators, what happens when we protect them is we have ample food to eat. About a 3/4 of our crops are pollinated by bees, and this is honeybees, but also many, many other bees. Bumblebees are very
Yeah.
important pollinators of crops, and other bees are too. So when we have ample bees, we're going to have nuts and fruits and greens. Without bees, in agriculture, what we would have is rice and wheat and a few other crops, and it wouldn't be very healthy nor very tasty. The tastiest, most nutritional crops come from bees. So there's, if we got bees, we got that. If we don't have bees, we don't. And if you move that to natural areas and the areas we love to walk and hike, and even in our neighborhoods, if we want flowering landscapes, we want bees. Without bees, and in some places where we've seen declines in bees, they start to see declines in pollination. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's us and the flowers. But what's more important, if we lose with bees, we've got seeds for birds and other animals. We've got plants for, deer and animals that are herbivores. We've got healthy environments. Without bees, we're going to start seeing lack of seeds and nuts and fruits. We're going to see a decline in the number of plants that are out there. So the landscape would be starkly different and will be starkly different if we kind of continue, unfortunately, down the path that we're on, because the data clearly suggests that we're not doing what we need to do to conserve bees, other pollinators, insects, wildlife in general. And there's
Yeah.
more that we can do.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest threat right now in terms of bee conservation and protection?
Yeah, so there's multiple threats. The way I think about it is it's kind of we've hit that phrase that the straw that broke the camel's back, right? We are losing habitat and continue to take habitat away from bees to
Yeah.
grow large monocultures in agriculture or lawns, that provides nothing. In the US, we've got 40 million acres of green lawn, provide nothing for pretty much any animal. So there's the habitat loss. Second only to that is pesticide use. We use more pesticides, including insecticides. So insecticides kill insects, bees, or insects. We're using those in agriculture, but we're also using those in towns and cities to have these perfect landscapes, the perfect roads
Yeah.
without any blemishes and these green lawns. So habitat loss, pesticide use, and then there's climate change. And climate
Yeah.
change, of course, is affecting all of every organism on the planet. We have to address that. Those are the big three. And then there are some smaller issues. If you really like moths, let's turn off lights and we'll be able to see the stars better, and the moths will be able to find their way better, right? So there are smaller things that affect these animals as well. But the main three are habitat loss, pesticide use, and climate change.
When you're talking here about habitat loss, the first word that comes to mind is literally biodiversity. And here I mean, like, whenever you have many species of plants, of course, that are all of them native, that are not harming each other, that are not in competition. Sorry, I'm not sure about the biological names here, but I know that you know what I'm trying to say here. I feel that when you have a habitat that is rich in biodiversity, then only good comes from that for every type of species at the end of the day, for all the invertebrates that you're mentioning, for the moths, for the flies, for the bees, for all of these amazing insects that play such a critical role. For the pesticide, I feel like it's really funny what you're saying. I understand why it's done, especially for agriculture use, because they want the food to last longer, to have
Right.
less infection, less disease. But for example, here in Italy, it's crazy because the regulations about the use of pesticide are so tight. There is such little use of pesticides here that, for example, whenever I buy strawberries in the supermarket, the next day they're already rotting. And this is how it should be,
Yeah.
actually. Like, this is how it's supposed to be. So in one way, I do understand why it happens. I do not think it's the solution. I think there needs to be an alternative. I'm sure that there are many different alternatives to pesticide, which you must know a lot about. But I just wonder why they keep using it. Like, why is there no better alternative for pesticide when it comes to agriculture?
Yeah, and there are better alternatives, and there are farmers
Oh,
we
of
work with.
course.
So I do want to point out, we work with thousands of farmers who are
Yeah.
working towards a better way to grow agriculture, and that is either organic practices. There are a lot of organic foods out there, and that means that farmer is taking that step to not use those pesticides. Even some of the larger farmers that use some pesticides, there's something called integrated pest management, which in short means you understand your farming system and you only use them as a last resort. But why we
Yeah.
use so many is directly related to large agribusiness and large chemical companies. It's a moneymaker. So chemical
Exactly.
companies push these chemicals, whether to, at least in the US, to gardeners. Oh, you want the perfect rose? Here's the poison to put on them so that that rose doesn't have any blemishes. For farmers, you'd better use these because you might have a pest. It's called prophylactic use, which is basically in many of our cropping systems dominant, where they use pesticides whether they're needed or not. They're not scouting for pests. They don't know for sure they're going to have a pest. It's kind of like this insurance policy, and it is not needed at all. But I like to mention the towns and cities because sometimes everybody points the finger at farmers. And
Yeah.
yes, there we have to work with even more farmers to do a better job. But let's point the finger a little at ourselves and where we live in certain places because we have to get everybody to step up on the pesticide issue.
Absolutely. It's also the choices that you make every single day. What type of businesses you're supporting, what type of foods you're purchasing, for what type of government are you voting. There are so many
Exactly.
different factors that
Yes.
have to do with the direct impact that is facing the planet. And at the end, there is no barrier for the planet, you know, like they're here when we're talking about passports, it doesn't really matter because all the effect that is happening in the US or in the Sahara or in Colombia, it's all going to be impacting the different parts of the world.
Yeah.
So indeed, I think it's super important what we're discussing here about the individual responsibility that there is instead of pointing fingers. Scott, so going a bit into the broader spectrum, not just to individuals, but to corporate businesses, to multinationals, of course. I'm sure that you and so many other organizations that at least we are working with at .seco are receiving a lot of funding from corporate partners. Can you share an example of impact made possible through such support, and how do these partnerships actually help you build towards your mission? Does it help at all?
Yeah. So funding from like-minded companies is vital for Xerces,
Yeah,
as well as I'm assuming for so many nonprofits. And to have a
yeah,
healthy nonprofit, you want to have a diversity of funding. So we
yeah,
have wonderful major donors, we have wonderful private foundations, but a really important part of that is our funding from companies. And companies are really helping us drive change. The cool thing is the funding is really important, right? I want to say the funding is really important, but hopefully I'll also get to talk about what some of these companies are doing just on their own. We're helping them do with their employees, with their customers, with everything
yeah,
else. So that's important as well. But the funding, a prime example is our work in agriculture is broadly supported by a number of companies that are helping us to reach farmers and work with farmers to put in habitat for pollinators, to change some of their farming practices, as we talked about, to minimize or to move away from pesticides. And it's huge. It's huge. We have, with the help of companies as well as other funders, we've helped actually restore and manage pesticides on millions and millions and millions of acres of farmland, and it's amazing. And many of these companies that we work with, I just so appreciate them. It's not about their PR.
yeah.
I think some people think, oh, companies do this just simply to look good, and there's the greenwashing and all of
Indeed.
that.
Yeah.
And there are companies that do that, so don't get me wrong. But the companies we work with are actually there, and the people at those companies to make change. And it's pretty neat to see when you see for-profits really leaning in on that, both with funding and with the culture at their companies.
Yeah. Following up on that question, Scott, what do you think makes a business partnership? Of course, you mentioned that you are only partnering with like minded businesses, but what do you think makes a business partnership truly impactful in this space where you're working on?
Yeah, so we have everything from, can I mention the names of companies? Is that okay? Or
Yeah,
is that
yeah,
so?
that's okay.
So I'm going to
That's
mention
okay.
General Mills. That's one of the largest food companies in the world, and we've got a deep connection to General Mills. And their work is helping us they help us both, they fund us to do work, but they also actually help us reach farmers. And they incentivize farmers changing adding habitat and changing their practices for the benefit of pollinators. And that's been huge to actually have a company messaging to their supply chain that, hey, we're funding Xerces to help you do a better job of growing the
Yeah,
food, right?
that's really
And
cool.
it's great because we have a lot of farmers who want to work with us, but this opens the door to many new ones. We've got other companies that don't work in the food space that have had us come in and give company-wide webinars about pollinator conservation and what they can do. And we've come in and planted pollinator gardens at their facilities so that people can see what that is. And they're messaging about how their employees can give back
Yeah,
it runs the gamut. But I think success is actually a partner who wants to actually understand what Xerces does and figure out where that fits in with their practices, with what they sell, with what they do, with how they message. and then we can work together to figure out the best way to get messages out and that.
Yeah,
And again, I want to say funding is vitally important too. So that's how us nonprofits continue because we're not for
of
profit.
course.
But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think then the next step, if you can have these deeper partnerships, just think how many people we're reaching when we can go into a large company and message about these issues. And the company is giving employees the time to learn. It's
Yeah.
pretty neat to see.
Of course, I believe that when you are taking the time to build these deep partnerships and not just focused on the funding, which, as you say, and I fully agree that it's very important, and it's also, I would say that it's at the core of a survival in the long term for an
Yeah.
NGO, but establishing in the long run a deeper partnership where there's education, where there are webinars, as you mentioned, this amazing initiative to go and create the gardens and educate, then at the end of the day you're tackling kind of like you're killing two birds in one stone because you're working closely with the business, but you're also bringing awareness and education to the individual. And I think this is extremely powerful of these business partnerships, in this case with Xerces Society. Scott, to wrap up what we are all waiting for, what are simple actions that individuals can make to make a real, can do to make a real difference? Of course, we already mentioned the garden, but I think that the listeners really want to know, like, okay, what can I do in the next couple of weeks or tomorrow? Quick actions that make a very big impact.
Yeah. So quick actions, and you actually mentioned some of these. Lifestyle is really important. If you
Yeah.
can, one of the most important things you can do for pollinators is buying sustainable or organic produce, right? Because the pesticides that are used on commercial produce are impacting the environment.
Yeah.
That's easy. But other easy things that you can do in the next few weeks are think about and I think this is the fun part, is to think about your landscape. Just, you don't need to change your whole yard or anything like that. Just start to plant some native flowers. Go to your nursery and ask for what are the best pollinator flowers and put them in. And if you have where you live, I think it's a little harder to potentially use pesticides, but in much of the world, pesticides
Yeah.
are way too easy to get and use. And
No.
if you've
Okay.
got that pesticide in your garage or in your house, just don't use it. You don't need to use it, especially in a yard. You just really don't. And then over time, what I also suggest is try to go out and sit by some flowers and look. And I think this really changes people's perceptions because we walk through life and these little animals are all around us and we never notice them. And when I can get people in all my talks, I say, go find a flower patch, bring your favorite chair, sit down. You can, if it's in your backyard, you can have your favorite drink. Doesn't have to be alcohol. Just look at what the nature, the little tiny insects are around you. I've gotten so many comments of, oh my goodness, I saw so many animals
Yeah.
I never had seen before. And now I truly understand why I
Yeah.
should take care of these landscapes. So that's one little thing you can do in the next 15 minutes is go out and just stop and start looking at some flowers and see the bees and other animals visiting it. They're helping you and they're
Yeah.
helping the planet and we can help
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I think there's a huge power in awareness. I really do, especially nowadays we're so disconnected from nature, from our surrounding and from the surroundings. And we go, for example, to do groceries, and what we see is a piece of meat or a piece of chicken or a
Yeah.
piece of whatever with a big fat label.
Yeah.
And we have no idea where it comes from, what the story is. And I think that is also a huge part of the story. We're completely disconnected from nature. We put humanity on one side and nature on the other side,
Yeah.
and we completely
Exactly.
forgot that at the end it's one big planet working
Yeah.
together, that at least should be working
Yeah.
together. So I think that this is a very great suggestion that you're making. I also highly encourage, yeah, awareness generation in general and small choices that, if we start to add them up, they make a very big impact. Scott, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning, I was really excited about this talk, and indeed I learned a bunch. So thank you so much for the
Yeah.
wonderful knowledge that you've shared.
Well, and thank you. And thanks for what Dots Eco does. I just think the connections that you make and what you do is impactful. And that's we need more of that. So I very much appreciate you as well. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks so
All right.
much.
Take care. Bye bye.